Hey friends, thank you for tuning in to what I believe is the eighth in our presentation series titled Another Plaque on the Wall, which is based on the various faith traditions that are represented on the plaques that are on the wall in our fellowship at UUFMB. This one I have a quick correction to make. I pronounce yin yang as yin yang in this entire presentation. I approach pronunciation as best I can all the time. But this one I really thought that I knew. I thought that it was yin yang, and I pronounced it wrong. And so I apologize for that. I hope you'll offer me a little bit of grace as you hear me say it every time. Maybe you learned something as I just said that, because I certainly learned it after this presentation that I was saying it wrong. I do a lot of research on pronunciation, actually. For example, you'll hear me say Taoism, and I understand that that is also pronounced Taoism, and they are the same word. But truly, yin yang was my error this time, and so I apologize for that. You'll also notice that I'm seated in this presentation, and that is because I've had bilateral knee replacement surgery as I'm speaking to you, and so I am doing my best. So I hope you'll forgive my seated posture, and I hope that you enjoy this. I've certainly enjoyed being a part of it. Picture it. It's 1995 and you've just finished redecorating your room. Everything is black and white. Even the floor has been redone with white linoleum with tiny black diamonds. Black window blinds and white walls, because Mom wouldn't go for black walls. Black and white bedding, black lace curtains, even posters of Looney Tunes characters in grayscale. And then the piece de resistance. It's called Yin Yang Infinity, and you found it at Spencer's Gifts. It's a black felt lined poster with off-white as the background, and a small yin yang in the upper half of the poster with concentric wavy lines around it that make the yin yang appear 3D. Like it sinks back into the photo, appearing three-dimensional. If you stare at it for a moment, it almost appears to move. This was my first experience with yin yang. I knew nothing about it being related to a faith tradition, and thank goodness my mom didn't either, or I wouldn't have the poster. I just knew it was the coolest poster I had ever seen. Today, we find ourselves exploring with a yin yang. The plaque, actually, which was created by Kerwyn Schaffer. Kerwyn was one of the group of artists that gathered in the fellowship. You've heard this story several times now, when Alona gathered them together. Kerwyn died in 2023. He was most at home on the water. He was an artist, a writer, a mystic, and an activist. And in fact, it might be one of the least interesting things about him for you to learn that he was transgender. But it definitely bears mentioning, because he was part of one of our panelists that helped us to get through the process of becoming a welcoming congregation. And one has to wonder if his selection to do the Taoism plaque, in addition to his interest in the mystical, his connection to nature, was also a bit of a parallel for his life. Like we've learned over and over again, there was a time when religion was science. In Chinese, it's called the Tai Chi symbol. And for us in English, we say yin yang, or we might soften that J sound to chi and say Tai Chi. Perhaps you've heard of Tai Chi. Maybe you've been to our Tai Chi or Qigong groups here. And if you have, perhaps you know that Qi represents energy. The term Tai Chi is literally translated to first of the great absolute. And every time I present on one of these plaques, I know that in many ways I am presenting to the experts. And so I hope that I can cover a middle ground between the things that you already know and maybe introduce you to a couple of new concepts in the process. I also know that in 20 minutes or less, there's absolutely no way I could even begin to cover these topics with the breadth that would do them justice. Still, thanks for giving me the grace to preach to the choir, as it were. The symbol that we see most frequently today, some believe, comes from the recording of shadows of a Naaman, which was basically just a big stick on the ground that acted as a sundial. And you see in this artwork that is showing a person holding a stick as the sun moves across the sky. By recording it throughout the year, it created a calendar. And the math of the gnomon is largely considered the foundation for Chinese philosophy. When these symbols, these shadows, were plotted out, it created this symbol, which is the yin-yang symbol. Perhaps you can see it around the top where the shadow begins is marked at summer solstice. And where things slowly begin to get darker, 5 squares into the yin, or shadow, we see the autumnal equinox. At the widest part of the shadow is the winter, and then into the yang is the vernal or spring equinox. And so the yin-yang is in itself a calendar. Still, the earliest versions of this symbol in a swirl pattern only date back to the 14th century. With the added trigram sequences, the lines underneath, they represent heaven, earth, fire, and water. But the very oldest version of this symbol looks more like this, which is several concentric circles split in half, black on one side, white on the other, and then a circle in the middle that is white. Zhao Dunyai's version is much older than the modern swirls we know today, but it still includes the trigrams for fire and water. And the trigrams are those black blocks coming out from the center. They're either filled in or not, and they represent Tai Chi, which translates again to the great ultimate being. In the center is Wu Qi, which translates to the ultimate non-being. So ultimate being on the outer sides, and the center is non-being. There are characters on the side that say yang motion, yin response. Master Zhu wrote the first major Chinese text that explored the concept of yin-yang. And within it, he shared his beliefs about creation, which involved positive and negative forces pulling against one another and finding harmony in the center, and then pulling again once more. Understand the yang or light doesn't automatically equal good. That darkness doesn't automatically equal bad. We have a hard time with that, maybe. So much of our language is predicated on bad, dark, bad, light, good, which has some roots in racial inequality in Western civilizations. Yin or yang wasn't meant to be a question of morality, rather a statement of duality. Positive and negative energies are what provide us with movement through the world that we need. And movement is needed to find balance. Otherwise, we find ourselves stagnant. And the small dots in each side represent that even in the opposites, there are pieces of the other. The whole of them is Tao. Everything is considered Tao. Neither is excluded, and both are necessary, which comes only from balance. And yet, Taoists are often also Buddhists or other faith traditions as well, because they don't see Taoism as exclusionary of other beliefs, and instead, perhaps as a lens through which to see the world. Sometimes, in order to find balance, though, we have to get rid of what isn't working for us anymore. Enter the year of the snake. In the Chinese zodiac, there's a 12-year cycle, and 2025 is the year of the snake. And while Christian texts seem to have a negative view of snakes because they were invading lands that were pagan, and pagans like snakes, traditions that have more of a connection to the earth and the elements have a reverence for snakes. In Taoism, the year of the snake calls for us to cultivate a deep sense of self-awareness. And the snake represents wisdom and flexibility to change. It's a reminder that we often already have all that we need for the challenges that we face. We entered into the year of the snake this year on January 29th. But the Chinese New Year festival ended on February 12th, 15 days later. And the end of the Chinese New Year, there's a lantern festival that's celebrated. The lantern festival dates all the way back to the 200s BCE. And it may have roots in Buddhism, but also there are a whole lot of legends tied to it. And I want to share one of those with you now, because that's more fun than some monks hung up some lanterns and the emperor liked it. So one legend says that the Jade Emperor was enraged with a village because a visiting huntsman shot down a phoenix that was protecting the village. He was so angry that he planned to burn the village down 15 days later. The phoenix survived being shot and loved the townspeople deeply, and so she forgave them, and so she came back to warn them of the attack to come and let them borrow some of her fire to light lanterns. When the lit lanterns on the 15th day were hung, the emperor thought the village was already engulfed in flames and overlooked them. And so they were spared. The point of the lantern festivals today is to celebrate that light is returning, to release the things that don't serve us from the previous year, shedding skin that doesn't fit anymore. In lantern festivals, people offer forgiveness to one another, and they choose to enter the new year with a clean slate. As you use perhaps the reminder of Taoism and the year of the snake in general is to temper our anger with love, but also to temper our love with action. Remembering that finding balance in our lives generally calls for movement. We will not find balance without keeping a forward momentum. Perhaps this seems counterintuitive if you've always taught yourself to be still, to rest, that rest is productive, etc. Those of us that commit too much and are always busy. But there can be stillness even in forward momentum. Come with me. If you jump inside of a moving train, you land in the same spot. Don't think about it too hard. There's a sciencey reason for that. I'm sure Bob could explain it to you, but not me. I'm not that. I'm not smart enough to understand that, but I invite you into the metaphor. If we find ourselves involved in movements, we find the things that we care about, invest our time in, invest our energy in and our resources. There's a stillness that is shared within us when the load is shared. We cannot bear it all on our own. Balance is keeping love at the center and asking, what actions are we taking to drive out hatred? How are we keeping ourselves involved in justice work, even when there is so much despair? Within myself, there is despair. What are we doing to ensure that the train keeps moving so that we can have the moments to be still? As an adult, I look back on this poster and I think, I wonder if I am the only person that ever bought and owned this poster without thinking about how cool it would look if I were high. Especially because I also had a strobe light and black lights in my room. But I was a very straight-laced kid. But I had all of the accessories. I wish I still had that poster now, actually. It's a collector's item now. It's for sale on poster collector sites and eBay. Mine specifically is long gone. May you find the courage to board the trains of justice as they begin to roll. You are not alone. In a world full of hate and divisiveness, love is the deepest act of rebellion. And so don't stop loving. Do it boldly, right in front of their faces. Right in front of the faces of those who profit from dividing us. Defiantly love, do it in their faces. May it be so.